have my reaction to a link that I clicked on yesterday. It's called Gaffs for All. It has 10 points or 10 proposals to write to the minister, and there's a little bit of a partition on this as well for people to sign up and get to 2,000 signatures. I will leave a link for that at the end of the video as well, so people can sign up for it if they want to. Basically, it has outlined 10 proposals to the government to help with the housing crisis, and I thought it would be a good idea to flick through them. And basically the first proposal is to make housing a human right and hold a referendum to put the right of housing into the constitution. So that's fair enough. I get that. I think we should have referendums, people should have their say. So I don't think there's any issue with having a referendum on housing. And if it is voted in, put it into our constitution. But what does that actually mean, having a referendum on housing and making housing a human right? Does it mean that everyone gets a 4-bed family home, or are we in communist style blocks for living, and who decides who lives where? There's multiple questions to be asked in regards to how that actually works in practice. I suppose what I would ask in practice, what happens to people who have already paid for their house and are living in their home? Do they get any credits for the fact that they've done that? What about people who have mortgages? Do they decide housing is in the constitution and the government have to provide me with housing, therefore I'm no longer going to pay my mortgage? And because it is a right within the constitution, do banks actually have any leverage to go and force those people out of those homes and get their mortgage back? Because that person could turn around and go, it's in the constitution and the government are going to give me housing and this is the house I want and I'm no longer going to pay my mortgage. So there's multiple kind of layers on top of this. And also what happens in terms of inheritance rights. Do inheritance rights disappear because if you're passing a house down to a family member, surely someone could argue that this is a right within the constitution that I'm entitled to a home, and therefore there shouldn't be any capital gains on that if you're inheriting a home. But there's even a bigger issue to think about it here as well, because effectively that's a state guarantee to every Irish citizen that they would be entitled to a home, and that's a huge liability for the Irish state to have on their books. And will international lenders look at that as a liability, so much so that the income from the state, i.e. taxes that they will generate within the state, are too big to cover that liability, and therefore they won't lend, or they'll demark Ireland down as a very poor credit risk because they have this liability to the Irish people. And who gets these homes? Is it everyone who has an Irish passport, or is it people who come in and have a right to residency? Where does it actually stop? I don't see a major issue about having a referendum on this topic, but I do think that we need to understand what we're voting for, because otherwise we'll end up in another Brexit situation. So the second one is a bit of a tongue twister for me for some reason. A state guaranteed delivery of significant supply of lifetime secure, affordable, decent quality green homes for all using public land for 100% actual affordable homes, providing 400,000 public affordable homes and social green homes in the upcoming decade, meaning 40,000 affordable homes per year, both new, using vacant and derelict buildings on state land, and CPOing additional land as necessary. Okay, so there's a lot in that second one. 400,000 homes to be delivered over the next decade. Actually, let's have a look to see what that is. So let's say in terms of cost, because it's ultimately taxpayers that are going to have to pay for this. So 400,000 homes, let's say it costs about 350,000 per home or per unit. Okay, calculator doesn't go up that high, probably have to turn it up. Okay, there you go. So that is 140 billion, if I'm reading that right. 140 billion. Let's just divide that by 10 so we know what it is each year, because it's an easier number to actually understand. And that is 14 billion per year. Okay, so that's a lot of money to go towards housing. So I suppose some of the concerns I would have with this is that it's a huge amount of homes to deliver, which is, to be honest, achievable. We've built more homes than that before in the past. It's just a little bit harder to build that amount of homes nowadays, but it is perhaps achievable with the right planning and execution and the right people involved. The issue, I suppose, with building it on all public land, that's fair enough. I don't have an issue with that. However, generally speaking, the state don't invest that huge amount of money in these type of capital projects themselves. They generally work with other private partners, and PPPs are done. It's how some roads are developed. It's how the Lewis, etc. All these kind of private companies get involved to do it and work with the government. And that is how the government currently is trying to deliver some of these affordable and social homes in terms of homes on public land. So if you move away from that completely, you'd need someone to go in and build and directly build, which I think they touch on later or maybe in the next point. So no major issue with this really. It's just how achievable it is and the actual cost that it will cost the taxpayer to actually fund this. The additional CPOing of land, if necessary, that comment bothers me, or that kind of bothers me. That kind of suggests that the government will have far-reaching powers to come in and force people to sell land to them. I don't think the government should be CPOing land just for housing. I think the government should CPO land for the likes of the Lewis, trains, road network, etc. because there's a clear reason why they will need a certain site to continue to develop a railway line or a roadway. So I think it's important that CPOing is allowed to happen for that. But CPOing for a land just to build houses, there's plenty of land available for sale. So why do they have to go into CPOing? Why not just buy land that's actually people want to sell before they have to CPO anything? So the next one is number 3, set up a state construction company as a semi-state enterprise to develop and build affordable homes and build to rent, refurbish vacant and derelict properties and undertake refurbishments or retrofits. Generally, I don't have any kind of issue with a state-run construction company or a semi-state enterprise that's there to build housing or social or affordable homes. I don't think I have any issue with that, as long as it's not overreaching in terms of competing with the private market as well. My also concern with it would be looking at other semi-state bodies and how they're run in terms of the inefficiencies that they have and how many times they go over budget, etc. But let's just say that doesn't happen and it runs very efficiently and it's managed quite well. I don't have an issue with a state body or a construction company who is a state construction company building affordable homes or social homes, is just as long as it's not competing or directly impacting the cost to the private market. So number 4 is give adequate state funding to guarantee new affordable and social housing, treble the state capital new building and renovation derelict and vacant fund from 2 billion a year to 6 billion for local authorities and housing associations, and set up a 5 billion national housing fund at affordable rates to finance and fund building of affordable homes. Okay, so the 2 billion that's currently committed already by the government under the Housing for All plan is probably one of the largest amounts that have been budgeted for housing, I think, in the history of the state. So it is quite a large sum. So trebling that again to 6 billion is probably maybe what's needed, to be fair, in terms of trying to deliver all the housing that's needed. But again, it's taxpayers' money, and who ultimately pays for all of this? Kind of going back to point number 2, in terms of how many houses were needed, in terms of the 400,000, I actually think it's going to cost way more than 6 billion if you're going to try actually develop that amount of housing. So number 5, moving on to number 5, make private rental homes homes. Okay, so they're not homes at the moment. Make rent affordable, implement a 3-year rent freeze, rent reduction mechanics, rent controls on new units to the market, give renters security in their home, implement a 3-year eviction ban, no fault evictions, ban tenancy terminations for sale of property, remove the ability for the landlord to evict tenants on sale, for no-fault evictions. Airbnb short-term stay rentals should be allowed for use on your primary home for less than 30 days a year in areas of high housing demand. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this one. Make private rental real homes. So I think that's a kind of a bit of a weird statement, but I get it a little bit from where people are coming from at the moment in terms of the rental market. But I myself have probably rented in about 3 or 4 different homes or different houses over my lifetime, and I would have always called them homes or felt like they were home. But I get the point, but I'm not quite sure how you make that a kind of a demand, because a home is more of a feeling rather than kind of actual anything real maybe. But next one is make rents affordable and implement a 3-year rent freeze. So I suppose on the first one, make rents affordable. I suppose that's a little bit up to the market unless the government step in completely. But way to make rents affordable is put more supply and it will become more affordable. Implement a 3-year rent freeze. That will probably drive more landlords out of the market, reducing supply, which will actually push up rents, making it less affordable. So I don't think that one will work. Rent reduction mechanics. Okay, I get that a little bit because perhaps in some leases there is no mechanics to reduce the rent. However, that said, again, it's about a supply issue. If more supply comes on and the market actually drops, then you have the market rents to go by and rents will be reduced. Rent control on new units entering into the market. So right now, new units coming onto the market aren't impacted by the rental cap. So I think that's what this is referring to. However, if you do implement that, you will stop development in its tracks, you will stop investment, and you will impact supply. So there'll be less rental supply on the market, making the situation even worse. So a handful of these are just going to make the situation far worse for renters. Granted, there might be 1 or 2 people, or not 1 or 2 people, but a handful of people in current rental situations that might benefit from this, but the overall market will massively suffer from this. So continuing on, give renters security in their home, implement a 3-year eviction ban of no-fault evictions. Yeah, perhaps no-fault evictions could become more of a thing. I think particularly they should definitely be a thing in built-to-rent units. But I think it would draw a 3-year eviction ban for no reason whatsoever would probably drive out even more landlords out of the market, reducing the supply again. Less landlords are likely to come in and buy, and therefore impacting the supply even further, pushing rents up again and impacting the rental market. So I think that could have a negative impact on the overall market rather than the positive one. So continuing on from this point, banning tenancy terminations for sale of property. There has been some kind of work on that already in terms of some of the larger landlords and larger blocks that they can't use the sale of that block as a right for termination. But for smaller landlords who only have 1 or 2 units, it's still available. However, I think more and more landlords would leave the market if something like that was proposed. Kind of continuing on this one, removing the ability for a landlord to evict tenancy on sale or other no-fault evictions. So the other no-fault evictions really are sale of a property, you need the property for a family member or yourself, or the property is no longer suitable for someone to live there, i.e. it's in such bad disrepair. Like realistically, I think they're reasonable grounds for a landlord to look for a termination of a lease if they want to sell it or if they need it for a family member. At the end of the day, it is their property, and also if the property is no longer suitable for a tenant to live there and major repairs need to happen, that should be a reason to terminate the lease as well. So I kind of get a bit worried if all those things were stripped away from a landlord. The last point on this one is Airbnb short-term rentals should only be allowed to be used in your primary home for less than 30 days a year in areas of high housing demand. Okay, so there's a few ways you can actually solve the Airbnb issue. Build more hotels. Just allow more hotels to be built in high demand areas. Part of the issue is we don't have enough hotels in the country. If we built more of them, there'd be less demand for Airbnb. And the demand for Airbnb is slightly falling off because people are sick of not going to hotels anymore. So there is a trend to move away from Airbnbs. But in terms of that 30-day thing, if we're all talking about, or we're all looking to move to a hybrid model of working, or more flexible hours, or more flexible terms, I myself am hoping that I can kind of move around a few months of the year, not be in Ireland. And I'm hoping to rent out my primary residence for those few months, because if I'm not able to rent it out for those few months that I'm away, I won't perhaps be able to afford that type of living. So we're halfway through this, but I don't think the rest of the points will take as much time. I think we'll probably get through these in a few minutes. But number 6 is end homelessness, develop new plan with clear timelines to end homelessness within the next 5 years, phase out emergency accommodation, expand housing first. Okay, so I don't think anyone should have an issue with that. Clear timelines are probably needed, but clear plans are also needed as well. And it's also probably important to realise that homelessness is not always just about lack of accommodation. Sometimes there's other issues at play there. I do think phasing out emergency accommodation is a good thing, actually, because a huge amount of hostels and hotels are actually currently being used for emergency accommodation. If we were to get that stock back into the short-term letting accommodation, you would be able to free up some of those units that are actually being used for Airbnb as well. So that could help that side of the market open up. I do think that this is an issue. The homelessness issue is a harder issue to solve. Not many countries, I don't think any country has ever solved it, really. It is a problem across the world, no matter what kind of supply of housing people or countries have. So I do think it is an issue for the government to resolve. The government this needs to be a priority of the government. And perhaps better timelines and kind of targets are required within this. The next one up is number 7. This is worded kind of strangely. Stop the REITs, investor funds, and property purchase as investments. I think that's not meant as a direct kind of like stop all purchases. Perhaps it's just stop residential purchase. I presume they're still able to buy commercial properties, and that's not what this is suggesting. So let's just assume that means stop residential purchases for REITs and investment funds. So keep going here. Remove the real estate investor trust tax incentive and all other investor fund tax breaks and loopholes. Levy a hefty tax on investors purchasing residential property to remove non-home buyers from the market. Okay, so there's a little bit more to this, but let me kind of just touch on that first. So, well, REITs, there's only one real REIT buying residential properties. There are a few investment funds that are buying residential properties, but they provide them back into the rental market. So we already know from point 5 that there's massive issues in the rental market. We kind of said we need more supply, even though it doesn't say within this, but we do need more supply to solve the issue. By removing investors out of purchasing residential property, you reduce the supply on the rental market all the more, and that impacts the rental market, which has great impacts on our economy as a whole if there's nowhere to rent. But remove the tax breaks and the loopholes, etc. Those tax breaks are generally set up in such a way so the funds can operate efficiently and invest and reinvest, and then when they take their money back out, they're taxed at that point, and the shareholders or their dividends are taxed. So it's not totally true that they're totally not being taxed, but I get the point that they want them to be taxed more. But if you tax them more, you make it more expensive for them to invest, you likely reduce the supply of more units coming onto the market, and we do need more units coming onto the market as rental stock. Point number 7 goes on: divest all state funding and pension funds and public sector pensions out of REITs and residential investment funds. Fair enough, if that's what's kind of voted on, perhaps, but I really think that's down to the pension fund trust managers within each state body to manage their own pension funds. Okay, moving on, we're getting there. Number 8, eliminate vacant site and derelict buildings and land sites. Put in place an annual use it or lose it tax set at a percentage of market value on vacant and derelict properties, land and buildings. Local authority to CPO 10,000 vacant and derelict homes per year and retrofit and convert them to social and affordable housing. Okay, so there's a little bit to unpack on this one. Generally speaking, there's always going to be some vacant and derelict sites and land. It's just naturally what happens. Buildings have life cycles, generally anywhere between 80 to 100 years. Buildings have a traditional life cycle of use, and it no longer becomes usable or viable to use it in that current use, and it's better to knock it down and start again for lots of different reasons. There's new technology, new construction, there's new sustainable methods and environmental methods in terms of building or how we use buildings. So buildings do have a life cycle. They will get to a point where they do need to be knocked down. Also, if someone is planning a major development of an area, particularly within a city centre, they're likely going to have to assemble a lot of land or a lot of old buildings to do that. And by doing that, it takes a long time to assemble all of those plots of land and buildings to create something big. Perhaps could be hundreds of new units or new apartments. But to do that, you might have to buy 10 or 15 smaller blocks or smaller lots, with some of them might be derelict sites. And to do that, it takes time. So those sites sit derelict because there's no point, or it's not feasible to actually retrofit them or let them be usable at that point in time if you're planning a much larger development. So there's always going to be some derelict sites. So eliminating them totally is just not really practical. Taxing it, use it or lose it. Okay, I get the point, trying to drive demand or try to drive supply. But a tax on such a kind of activity, when we want the activity to actually happen, you're just adding cost to it, and ultimately the end user, i.e. the home buyer or renter, are the ones who are going to end up paying that tax in the long run. The local authority to CPO 10,000 units and derelict homes per year. Okay, that's again another cost. Okay, so let's get the calculator out again. We said 10,000 units per year. Let's say if they're CPOing these, they have to pay market price for these. The average price of a home might be 250,000 across the country. Some are going to be more, some are going to be less, but let's just take an average of 250,000. They're also going to retrofit all of these homes. If they're derelict, they probably need a lot of work, and as someone who's just done work like that, it's extremely expensive. So let's just say they get away with about 450k. Let's say they get around 450k per unit in terms of buying the unit and retrofitting it. We have a total, again, too big of a number to fit on my calculator. I have to turn it. That's 4.5 billion a year in terms of the councils doing that. So again, we're at a stage where there's huge taxpayers' money to be spent on all of this housing. I don't like the idea of local authorities just CPOing houses. Again, CPOing land for railway or roads, etc. is fine, but CPOing individual houses, I think that interferes with people's property rights, and I don't really support it. And I think the government, in terms of providing social and affordable homes, should be doing it themselves. They should be providing it, and I think Rory is right here. The government should be doing more on that. But I don't think they should be CPOing private individuals' homes to achieve that. Okay, so number 9, ensure all marginal groups have appropriate, adequate housing. Put in place equitable and right-based monitoring and implement all housing policy. Well, that's pretty kind of just self-explanatory. Fair enough, the government should look after people who are disadvantaged. Number 10, last one. Green and retrofit all homes, including renewable energy, rewiring and food production, to make our housing system zero carbon in a social just way. Make available a 100% retrofit grant to low middle income households. Geez, I would have loved that full retrofit grant myself right now. It would have come in handy. So I don't have a huge amount of comments on this one. It is an aspirational goal. Perhaps all our homes should be carbon neutral, and perhaps the government should provide some funding to people who can't do it themselves. But I think grants are probably important on this one because it is extremely expensive to do, and perhaps the wins in terms of clawbacks on energy costs, etc., just aren't there at the moment. So grants may help or may have to happen to make it happen. So there is some additional things in this in regards to why it is important and why you should be signing this petition. Again, I will leave a link to that petition if you want to sign it. They're looking for 2,000 signatures. They've got just over half of them already. I don't know how long this petition has been going on, perhaps about a month, but I will leave a link to it. To be fair, some of these comments are aspirational comments. It would be great to live in a society that we could actually do this and afford to do all this, particularly for the social housing side of things. But in terms of the overall cost and the practicality of actually delivering on all of this, I would have questions. I'd also have major questions in regards to how we make housing part of our constitutional, as part of a right within our constitution. If anyone knows of any country that has housing within their constitution, let me know. I'll look into it and let you know what I find. But it would be interesting if actually any country in the world does have housing as a right. Every member of a state gets housing as part of that right. I would say fair play to Rory for putting these 10 things together and driving on this agenda. Doesn't align with kind of some of my thinking. But I suppose in summary, my concerns would be the cost to the taxpayer, the legal liabilities in regards to housing being a constitutional right, what happens to people who have housing. CPIing private property is an issue. I think that's a loss of property rights that we have fought for a long time to get. The government having such power is an issue. I think also the government having such a hand in social and affordable housing in terms of the actual numbers that they will have at the end of such a plan, if that was to come true, in terms of 400,000 units and more, is a huge amount of state housing. I would prefer if the state was promoting individual ownership for housing rather than state housing ownership. So I think that's where I would majorly differ from Rory in that regards, that I would be promoting or looking to promote individual ownership rather than state ownership. I'd also have some concerns in regards to some of the restrictions on renting. I think they'd actually make the situation far worse for the rental market, which would ultimately damage our economy if people can come in and move into cities as they need to, as they get jobs, etc. If there's nowhere to rent, that will have a major impact on our economy and businesses wanting to move to Ireland. So I think enough damage has been done to the rental market already. I think we should be trying to support landlords to provide a sustainable and functioning rental market, but all these restrictions or ideas of restrictions in regards to how landlords manage their properties ultimately lead to more landlords leaving and ultimately lead to a dysfunctional rental market. The only way around that is if more and more investment companies come in and build more and more rental units, and there's enough there to meet supply, that rental levels in terms of price actually come down. But that's a long way off in my mind. So I think we need to support the smaller landlords first to make sure there's not an absolute complete crash of the rental market soon and no one will be able to rent at all. I think some of these ideas are a little bit too far left in terms of my thinking or my views. That doesn't mean they're not your views, and there doesn't mean that you shouldn't support them. So as I said, I will leave a link below. Thanks for watching. For those people who don't know me and have watched all this time till getting to here, thank you so much for watching all the way through. My name is Shane Fleming. I've been working in property as a property consultant for about 18 years. I have a degree in property economics and I put out YouTube videos all the time. So please subscribe to the channel if you got this far.